Welcome, everyone, to Change It Up Radio and the special segments that we're doing at this time of year on grief and the holidays. I'm Paula Shaw, your host, and this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart because when you're hurting at this time of year, it can be agonizing. It can be so difficult because you feel so out of it, because it looks like everyone else's life is working, because you're riddled with memories of times in the past when things might have been so much better. It's exhausting for everybody at this time of year, and you just may feel very isolated and without anyone who really cares about what's going on with you. And if that's happening in your life, you want to stay tuned for this episode of Change It Up Radio, because I'm going to be talking about my holiday survival checklist for people who are grieving, people who are sad, or going through heavy duty emotional situations right now. Last week, you may remember, I talked about grief and the holidays with my friend Ellen McCarty. And the holidays being what they are, Ellen has gotten sick and she won't be able to be with us this morning, but we're going to carry on without her. And I must say that I have been working with grieving people since the 90s and been through a lot of holidays with people who were dealing with loss or dealing with upheaval in their life, in their home, in their family. And all of that creates grief. And grief isn't just sadness because someone died. Grief is a myriad of feelings. And I think it's important that we talk about that kind of full compendium that people are going through. So without any further ado, let me just say the things I always say at the beginning. If you would like to know more about my work as a life transition coach and grief specialist, you can get that information on paulashaw.com. You can also find out about my work as a speaker. And of course, you know my work as a podcast host here. And if you want to learn more about this podcast or get information about being a guest or a sponsor on this show, or if you would like to listen to past shows, and oh my goodness, we've got so many great shows, including last week's first show on grief and the holidays, you can find that information on changeitupradio.com. I'm also the author of 3 books: Chakras, the Magnificent 7, Grief, When Will This Pain Ever End? And Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say. And all 3 of those books are available on Amazon. All right, so let's get into this whole grief in the holidays thing, because there are people hurting out there, and they may have a feeling or an understanding of why they're hurting, but they may be thinking, but what on earth do I do? How do I feel better? And the first thing I want to tell you is, even though the temptation is to just hang out alone, to just close the blinds, close the door, and just try to get through it. Or as one of my clients once said, I just wish I could go to bed, pull the covers over my head, and not wake up until January 2nd. And that's kind of how a lot of grieving people feel. There's so much involved in the holidays, even if you're at your absolute best. I mean, I know I just spent yesterday totally immersed in sorting and wrapping and getting all the gifts ready. And I enjoyed it. I loved it. I played the holiday music and it was great fun. But if I hadn't been feeling myself, if I had been hurting or scared or worrying or angry or frustrated or in a state of disbelief, that experience I had yesterday would not have been the kind of experience it was. So I get it that there are people out there experiencing all those things, because let's remember, grief has many faces. It's not just tears and sadness. It might be bewilderment. It might be inability to focus. It might be rage. It might be depression. It might be extreme anxiety. It might be listlessness and no energy. There's so many ways that grief shows up. And that's why I always encourage grieving people to take care of themselves, eat right, get plenty of rest. Your energy is being challenged every moment. And my favorite analogy to use with grieving people is to remind them, if they'd been hit by a Mack truck and were in a body cast, they would not have a lot of demands on themselves. They certainly wouldn't be showing up at the holiday parties or trying to do a holiday dinner or wrapping 30 presents. No. So a lot of those kinds of cutbacks may be things you want to consider this year. We're going to be talking about that a little more specifically in just a little bit. But first of all, let's just say, as many of my clients have expressed to me recently, either they're dealing with a death or they're dealing with lack of funds this Christmas. Some have lost their homes. Some have just had upheaval in their employment situations, and they don't know, excuse me, they don't know what they're going to do. All of these are the kinds of situations, the kinds of losses that produce grief. And when you're feeling grief, you're pretty much in a situation that is totally the opposite of what the holidays are all about, right? It's about joy. It's about family. It's about gatherings. It's about laughter. It's about singing. There's so many parts of the holidays that we love: eating wonderful food, baking, decorating. All of those things take energy. But when you're in a state of joy, you have that energy. In fact, it creates more energy when you're in a state of joy doing those things that you love doing. So that's completely different from the state people may be in when they're grieving. So if you are one of those people who are dealing with loss this Christmas or this holiday season, whatever the holidays are that you celebrate, there are some suggestions I have of things that you might do that can help you to not feel so alone and so hopeless and so sad. So the first one, writing. Writing can be such a therapeutic thing, whether it's writing in your journal or writing a holiday letter. And that doesn't have to be filled with lots of cheerful, wonderful stories. It could be a thoughtful letter about what's happened for you this year in this holiday season. It could be a fantasy story that you make up, that you immerse yourself in, that gives you some escape and some peace. So use the tool of writing. It's often very, very helpful. Another thing that I always talk about as being probably the number one therapeutic thing we can do: quiet sharing. Find the safe people, whether it's your therapist, your mom, your best friend, someone at the office that you trust. Find those people that you're safe with and speak about what's really going on for you. That can be so helpful. Talking something through helps you process it. And as I've said before, when it comes to grief, the only way out is through. So find those places where you can engage in quiet sharing. Sometimes, in fact, you might just say to a friend, hey, listen, I just can't talk about it anymore, but I'd love it if you come over and watch a movie with me. Sometimes just quiet company is great. So feel free to explore that experience because it can be really, really helpful. It can also be very helpful to have some kind of rituals that you engage in every day. One of my favorites is just to, in the morning, when the day is new, light a candle and then speak, whether I'm speaking to spirit or I'm speaking to the person I've lost, or I'm just talking to my guardian angel or whoever feels comforting to me. And just talk about what's happening and what does your day look like and what are your hopes for that day and what things can you be positive about that day? Where can you focus on something kind of positive? You know, one of the things I've also found really therapeutic when dealing with a loss is to light a candle in the morning. That's a memory candle. And safely, if it's enclosed, of course, let it burn all day or as long as feels good to you. If you're only home in the morning, getting ready to go out into the day, burn your candle and feel the presence of whomever it is that you're now departed from. Another thing that can be really helpful is, speaking of candles, if you're gathering for Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever other celebration you may be having, one of the things our family did that was so helpful when we lost my brother-in-law was we bought a special candle, and that was Larry's candle. And every holiday gathering, we lit Larry's candle. And it was just a way of honoring him and of remembering him after we'd lost him. And it was comforting for all of us. And, you know, it's tempting when you get together with family not to talk about that loss, not to talk about whatever it is that people have gone through that year or even recently. But then you've got like this big giant elephant sitting in the middle of the living room that everybody's dancing around or working around and trying not to talk about. Let's don't do that. It's not helpful. It really isn't. And it's not therapeutic. So go ahead and speak about it. You don't have to dwell on this subject the whole day or the whole evening, but let it be out there. Let it be honestly and authentically experienced so that everybody can feel better and not be trying to figure out a way not to bring it up. That can be really, really helpful. Sometimes it's just good to focus on whatever happened, you know, to just take some moments for yourself and just go ahead and focus on your loss. And if it feels good to journal about it, do that. If you feel like you need to just pound on a pillow or express your feelings, remember, feeling your authentic feelings is critical. Expressing your authentic feelings is critical. So take the time for that. If that's what you need to do, if you wake up and you've had a dream that stirred your emotions, or you're doing your morning inner work and you're suddenly feeling emotional, let it happen. Let it fly. Bring it up. Scream and rant and rave if you have to. Beat on pillows, but get it out. Because emotions are energy in motion and they are meant to be expressed. We don't want to keep them inside because if we do, if we push them down, they fester and they'll create a physical problem or an emotional problem or in some way jeopardize your health. So I can't encourage you enough. Get those feelings out. Again, with safe people in a safe situation. It's often really helpful to engage in creative projects. Maybe you're not going to go to the holiday parties, or you may even choose not to gather with family. But maybe it would be fun and feel good to you to create ornaments for everybody or to create wreaths. I remember one year I made a wreath for each of the families, the people within my family. And it was a lot of work. And I did it after the children had gone to bed at night. But you know what? It was one of the most satisfying and fulfilling things I'd done. So, whatever your love is, if it's painting, if it's clay, if it's decoupage, if it's collage, whatever it is you might like to do, perhaps you want to do a little creative project, either for yourself or for others in your family, something that will help you feel good and have some sense of participation in this holiday season. And remember, speaking of the holidays, if you're dealing with grief, things are different already this year. They are not what you've experienced in the past, in all likelihood. So don't hesitate to create new traditions. I remember listening to Anderson Cooper's podcast, All There Is, and it's a podcast about grief and loss. And one of the things he was saying is the year after they lost his father, and then several years later after they lost his brother, he and his mom just said, we can't do the whole Christmas thing, not now. And so they didn't do the decorations, they didn't do cards, and they just had a special quiet dinner together. Didn't do a lot of socializing because that isn't what felt authentic and genuine. So, and by the way, if you need anybody's permission to cut back this year, to give yourself a break, to nurture yourself, I am officially saying, please do that for yourself. You are absolved of any guilt. This is like a doctor's prescription. Give yourself a break. Take some time for you, whatever that looks like. If you just want to sit and meditate for hours, if you want to just lay on the floor and stretch or do yoga, one of my favorite things to do is a gratitude walk. You get outside, you breathe fresh air, and you have a chance to experience nature and just think of all the things as you walk along that you're grateful for. It might be blue sky. It might be flowers that just bloomed. It might be the fragrances in the air or smelling a fire burning in someone's fireplace. Whatever it is, that gratitude walk can really help shift your energy because gratitude and love are the two highest vibrations of energy. So if you can move to that, very helpful. And one last thing I'm going to suggest, because I find it one of the most therapeutic things ever that you can do, is find somewhere to be of service to others. Whether you go volunteer at the local soup kitchen or whether you find a group that's engaged in a holiday activity. It might be singing, it might be serving food to people, It might be taking clothing or gifts to them. Being engaged in those kinds of projects can be so important, so helpful. Being of service to others helps take our minds and our hearts off ourselves and the sadness we may be feeling. Recently, my friend Don Meredith did a wonderful thing. He found a family who had nothing, who weren't going to have a great Christmas. They weren't going to have presents. They weren't going to have food. And Don was once inspired by my dad's story of how a wealthy woman saw his brother looking in through a window in a toy store on the streets of New York and said, "Boy, I bet you're going to be getting a lot of presents this Christmas." And he said, "Oh, no, no, we won't. We're very poor and we won't have presents." This woman found out where he lived and who the children were from some people in the neighborhood. And she showed up on Christmas Eve with a turkey, which they were never going to be able to have, with other parts of this Christmas dinner, and with a gift for each child. So Don Meredith now calls that the Jack Gutman Christmas, because my dad inspired him when he told him that story from his own life. And just a few days ago, Don found a woman with 3 young sons who would not have had any sort of Christmas. And others got excited about it too, and they donated gift cards and money. And Don was able to take all this to this woman. And he sent me pictures, and I sobbed. It was one of the most beautiful things ever. It was just all about giving. It happens that Don's very fortunate this year. He's not grieving. His life is very lovely. But the act of finding someone in need and giving something to them. I've been walking around with a lot of $10 bills in my wallet lately, and everybody I see on a street corner who is asking for help. The other night, I saw some man just huddled up in a ball by the entrance of my grocery store. And I just gave him some money, and he just lit up. They're so grateful. And it made me light up too. So be of service to someone. Find that someone who needs you as much as you actually need them. Now, a few other categories I want to cover just on logistics. A lot of this may already have happened in your life because it's a little late in the season, but just for ideas for the future for some of you, and some of you that still may be looking at things. The tree. You don't have to get a tree if you don't have the energy to put it up and decorate it. You might just do a little small tabletop tree, or just buy some kind. I put ornaments on a little tree in the corner of my living room that's there year round this year, because we're spending Christmas at my brother's and my daughter's. Holiday dinner, just as I mentioned in the story about Anderson Cooper. You don't have to do a big holiday dinner. Cook your favorite thing or order out. You're absolutely allowed. New Year's Eve. It might just be nice to stay home, light a fire, invite a good friend, maybe cook up a chili or a soup or something, and just have a special evening with someone who you're safe with and who you love and who loves you. New Year's Day, you might want to go out of town. You might want to go away somewhere for a weekend and just relax. Just get away from it all. A holiday trip can often be a great idea, because when everything has changed in your life, it's helpful not to try to recreate things the way they were, because they aren't that way anymore, are they? So it's very, very helpful, I think, if you take the time to, who knows, just grab an Airbnb for a weekend and just be somewhere different and nurture yourself. do a facial mask or take a hot bath, do a nice, beautiful walk somewhere that isn't the usual everyday thing in your life. So if those things are helpful, oh, by the way, when it comes to the cards and so many other things that are very, very difficult, wrapping, oh my goodness, wrapping all the presents, gift cards are an amazing boon to holiday giving. Gift cards can make such a difference in the time spent on those kinds of things. And as far as Christmas cards, if you don't have the energy to spend hours signing the cards and going to the post office and doing all those things, you don't have to send them. You absolutely don't have to send them. If you don't have the energy to bake, don't bake. But if baking gives you joy, oh, absolutely, bake your favorite things. So I think you get the cut of my jib here. I'm saying find what gives you joy, do what gives you joy and peace. Maybe peace and comfort are the best that you can give yourself this holiday season if you are grieving, if you are sad. And that's okay. That's really okay. Because after all, isn't it really the season of peace? And isn't the best thing we could hope for right now in the whole world peace? Thank you for being with me today. Remember, you can hear us on every major podcast platform. And I'd love it if we hear from you, if you subscribe, if you like the show, and please, most importantly, share this show, especially with someone you know who's hurting for the holidays. All right. We'll be taking a little break, but we will be back in January. And we're going to continue this conversation about grief because there's a lot of grief in the world today. And grief is one of those things you can't just pretend it doesn't exist because it has a way of rearing its ugly head. It has a way of not letting itself be ignored. So I want to continue the discussion. I want to bring you guests who have found a way to deal with their grief, to live with and through their grief, and get to the other side, to the new normal. So I look forward to seeing you in January with more of those stories. In the meantime, have a blessed and beautiful holiday season. Take care of yourselves. And remember, it's okay if you're hurting to take even better care of yourself. And if you're not, count your blessings and help someone who is. All right. Thanks for being with me. See you in the new year. Bye-bye.